the Jesuits doing the right thing about Marco Rupnik. It was like traveling in a time machine almost back to when the Jesuits were the sons of St. Ignatius of Loyola, because for those who don't know, and so these guys then attacked papal infallibility by throwing the responsibility for Ted McCarrick squarely at the feet of the recently canonized John Paul II. I mean, this was 2019 when they did this.
The whole, fake female lady at the Oscar Romero anniversary down in San Salvador. It just feels like the last desperate attempt of the modernist cult to jam it down our throats. Do you think that they're in the death throes?
And the case is being handled by Cardinal Parolin, the one that everybody seems to think is the most capable of becoming John the 24th is the name that he'd likely take.
Ouch.
How we know he would take that name, by the way, is because...
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Dr. Anthony Stine from returntotradition.org joins us this morning. I think we want to get him on every Friday if possible. Good morning to you, Dr. Stine. Good to have you on the team.
Good morning. I hope everything this entertaining week in the church has treated you well.
That's right. At least we don't live in boring times, right? Like there's always something to talk about. There was a number of stories that you reported on over at Return to Tradition. I want to get into some of those and maybe get your hot takes on the top of the list. But I also want to ask you about Cardinal Parolin and the story coming out of Spain, and get your take on that to see if you're interested. Let's start with your list. What do you think your favorites were for the week?
I think possibly the story I covered this morning, which was the Jesuits doing the right thing about Marco Rupnik.
Yeah.
And the Vatican it was like traveling in a time machine almost back to when the Jesuits were the sons of St. Ignatius of Loyola, because for those who don't know, the Jesuits expelled Marco Rupnik from their order, and they got criticized for it because it allowed them to get incarnated by the Vatican. But you forget that if a religious order expels you for being a predator, the natural reaction from Rome should be, hey, why don't you come hang out in the Vatican for us? We have this nice little cozy little room for you. You'll get your due process rights, but you're not leaving. You're not going anywhere unsupervised while we go through this. But instead, he got incarnated in his home country. And so the Jesuits recently said, hey, you know what we're going to do is we're going to start doing things like reparations for this. And we're going to work with the victims of his. I don't know about you, Joe. I can't describe the things he did in any detail because they're just so they're not just violent and disgusting and impure and immodest and everything else. And it's not merely because of the scandal that would be caused, but I can literally not bring myself to verbalize in any detail the actual things he did involving mass implements. I just can't.
It's just diabolic.
It's beyond anything that a normal person should be able to even say. Like I don't know how the writers of the news articles managed to describe it.
And still they use his artwork, Dr. Stine. They're still using and promoting his artwork and justifying it. I don't feel like there's a not only was it, I believe, empirically ugly artwork to begin with, but when you add the fact that there's this diabolical layer to it, I don't believe any chapel, any church, any organization on planet Earth should want to keep his artwork anywhere near them.
You would think, but apparently some cathedral directors and some parishes and others have said, well, the cost is too high to get rid of it, or it's not people aren't bothered by it that much. They can separate the artist from the art or whatever. Okay. If this was Maciel, would you have said the same thing?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Nobody defends Maciel. Literally nobody defends that guy. Right. I've never met that person other than maybe some still, for some reason, priests who are still legionaries of Christ will.
Well, how many men walked away from their vocations after that scandal broke?
Right. And in the same way here you had with Rupnik, because he was, in addition to making some really tacky and some have said diabolically inspired art, if you actually really go into the imagery he uses in his art.
Yeah.
He was also the spiritual director and the head essentially of an order of religious women, the women he preyed upon. And a lot of them left their vocations afterwards. Do you blame them at all?
Not really.
I don't think abandoning a vocation is ever good, but you understand why they would make that decision, especially after their pleas fell on deaf ears for 35 years, 40 years. That's how far back this goes.
Well, decimating religious orders has been the order of the day since Francis took the chair back in 2013. That was one of the first things that his Vatican Curia did, was start to decimate religious orders, especially religious orders that were more traditionally minded. the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate and their associated female side of the organization. In particular, the Dictator Pope book details that in graphic detail, I would argue. So, I mean, I guess from that perspective, the pontificate currently was like, well, Rupnik's really kind of on the team. So guess why he's being protected.
I don't know, but the whole thing reminds me of what I call the Vigano John Paul II Benedict XVI report, which was the Vatican's official response to Archbishop Vigano's accusations about Ted McCarrick. They called it the McCarrick report, but they painted Pope Francis to be like the big hero of the story and blamed squarely John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Archbishop Vigano. And as I mentioned this morning in my stream, afterwards you had a lot of these surrogates for Pope Francis saying, maybe in the future we should wait 40 or 50 years to canonize popes, exactly, what it used to be. Yes. In an astonishing attack on papal infallibility and magisterial authority, because after all, never strictly speaking formally defined as an act of papal infallibility. If a pope says this person is in heaven and can hear your prayers and intercede for you before the throne of God, you'd think that would be an act of papal infallibility. And so these guys then attacked papal infallibility by throwing the responsibility for Ted McCarrick squarely at the feet of the recently canonized John Paul II. I mean, this was 2019 when they did this.
Yeah.
So when was John Paul II canonized? 2015? 2016? Something like that. It was
quickly,
relatively recently.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, all the post-conciliar pontiffs all getting the nod. I mean, isn't there a cause for JP1 as well?
There is. It's because they're politically and rather nakedly just canonizing the council. That's what they're doing.
You know, a lot of this reporting I've been doing this week, looking at some of these stories, like the whole, fake female lady at the Oscar Romero anniversary down in San Salvador. Like, it just feels like the last desperate attempt of the modernist cult to jam it down our throats. Do you think that they're in the death throes?
I think they know they could be, but it all depends on how the conclave goes. The one that we know is coming sometime in the not terribly distant future. Not to be ghoulish about this, but men of Francis's age with his complications and the things he goes through don't stick around for very long. And there's why you have pressure on him to get to resign. That's what they want, because they think they have a better chance. Now, a big curveball in all of this, because we don't know what happens behind closed doors at the conclave, but we've gotten general ideas that they talk about big pressing issues facing the church. And some laity are now suing via the canonical courts 6 of the most likely types of cardinals to keep going with Francis's work. And they've accused them of hiding predator priests, covering that up. So that's going to definitely be a subject of discussion if a conclave happens anytime soon. And and the case is being handled by Cardinal Parolin, the one that everybody seems to think is the most capable of becoming John the 24th is the name that he'd likely take.
Ouch.
How we know he would take that name, by the way, is because he's not being that subtle about this. And Parolin would be a nightmare. Not to mention that all the people who love Catholic prophecy would just be doing cartwheels, because now you'd have a Pope Peter, basically. Peter the Roman. He's an Italian named Peter.
We live in interesting times.
Build a bomb shelter at that point.
That's right. That's right. Get your purple scapulars today. Link below. I don't actually have a link. I'm just teasing. But I got to tell you, there's another story about Parolin that came up that I was looking at this morning. I don't know if you follow this or not, but Catholic, they actually reported on a whole scandal going on in Spain. Now, when it comes to the Spanish Civil War, it seems very complicated. I've even talked to Father Charles Murr about it, who lives in Spain, to help me better understand it. And he's like, it just really depends on what side of that equation you fall, because you might be a good Catholic, but your family was harmed by this side or the other side, and so your loyalties can really vary. Well, the Valley of the Fallen, which is what they're calling it these days, is at the heart of a new, fresh Spanish Civil War scandal where Franco had all of these people buried and a monument built and a basilica, and the Benedictine monks have been in charge of it ever since. Well, now they want to kick the monks out and take it over and then really rewrite the history. They don't like Franco. So that's what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Well, the monks are like, we will only listen to the Pope. Cardinal Parolin's like, nah, we don't need to bother the Pope. He's not feeling well. Don't worry. I've got this. We'll negotiate. So he's been negotiating with Spain on the back end. this whole time, and we all know how well he did with China. Some are saying he's selling them down the river. Have you heard this story?
Only a little bit. It's one of those I'm going to look into in more detail for to cover.
It's convoluted. Like I don't know how to make heads or tails of it all sometimes, because like, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? It feels very gray when you talk about the Spanish Civil War.
Well, if you're coming out against the church and wanting to restrict public monuments to the faith from the public sphere in Spain, I don't think you're the good guy in the story.
Right.
I tend to have zero tolerance for the or any sympathy no sympathy whatsoever for the socialist side in that conflict and their spiritual children. I've encountered them in life since then, many times actually. I worked with a girl in grad school who was from Spain and was mortified when she found out I was Catholic.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh, the hatred runs deep there. It's massive. And Franco, I mean, I understand why a lot of young Western right wingers like Franco. You get some of them who are well read, candidly talking, and some of them say, "Look, we want to prevent that kind of thing having to happen anywhere else." An interesting book you want to read, by the way, if you ever want to know why George Orwell became very cynical about socialism later in life, because he was a full-throated socialist until he went to Spain to shoot a fascist. And then he discovered that his real enemy there wasn't the fascists, it was the communists. It was Antifa, literally Antifa, and the Soviet Union that were his big enemies. Homage to Catalonia is a fascinating book to read.
Then how do you explain all those wonderful, beautiful passion pageantry parades that they have? They're just amazing, yet there's vitriol towards the Catholic faith.
Because you want more, and I want to give it to you. I'm rolling out a brand new membership program for the insiders of this channel. Join today. There's something for everyone. And because you could help me fund the next documentary film, the next book project, audio drama, audio narrations, and other projects that I have been dreaming to work on, but simply don't have the resources to accomplish. You and I together can do amazing things. You want more, and I want to give it to you. Just think about it. Whatever you can do at any level, any size, click below. Join the team. We'd love to have you.
Association of Victims of Abuse files charges against 6 cardinals at catholic.de. I'll link to it in the show notes for you. Dr. Stine, welcome back. What is going on in this story? Is this a wild card?
I don't know if they were trying to time this for the conclave, but it will certainly impact conclave if there is one in the next few months. These kind of things, they got to remember, the progressive, we'll call them, Cardinals probably don't care that much about this, and maybe even some of the conservative ones don't. But you got a lot of bishops from the peripheries, to borrow Pope Francis's terminology, who are absolutely mortified about the state of the church in the West. These are the bishops who came out against fiducia supplicans, and who are not unwilling to put 2 and 2 together about the treatment of, we'll say men with James Martin's kind of weird interest in that.
Weird.
One of them are weird.
Horrible. Yes.
Yeah, horrible, unholy. And the presence of such people in the priesthood and the predatory priests is in their perfect correlation when you actually do the statistical numbers crunching on it. They will be less tolerant of this. And it's interesting that what the effect of this could be, because one, the most papabile of all of them is the one investigating this. And the other is that a vacuum could be created. If a lot of these men's statures fall, then all of a sudden you get some other papabile type cardinals not named there will have their statures increase. And I'm thinking my nightmare scenario, Cardinal Hollerich. I keep thinking that, I don't think he's going to be Pope, but do not be surprised if you find out later that he does very well at the conclave, because of just the way the institutional dynamics seem to work in these things now. Most of these cardinals don't talk to each other anymore because they don't have proper consistories in Rome and haven't since the first year. And so who do they talk to? Their geographically closest cardinals, and then whoever their point of contact is in the Roman Curia. And that allows for manipulation of the conclave easily. And this is the kind of thing that could influence it, especially if, Tagle suddenly is finding himself being alienated by the other peripheries cardinals. And Erdo, I believe, is he African or is he North European? I can't even picture him right now.
I thought Erdo was African. Hold on, we can look it up. I do want to name these men just so that it's clear for everyone here. Let me do that. So specifically, the Cardinals are Peter Erdo, Kevin Farrell, who I want to come back to him in a minute, Victor Fernandez, Mario Gretsch, Robert Prevost, and Louis Tagli. All of them, it says, all of them are being mentioned in media reports as possible papal candidates. SNAP stands, and that's the group. SNAP is the Survivors Network for those who have been abused by priests. The organization was founded in the USA in 1989 and has a global network. So they filed a canon law, a complaint, I guess that's what it's being called, a complaint by canon law, so that these men will be investigated for their involvement in covering up, I guess, these crimes. And I find that very interesting. Kevin Farrell, will remember we were talking about his former boss in the last segment, the founder of the Legionaries, Maciel. We were talking about him a minute ago, and Kevin Farrell's like, remember, he didn't know anything about Maciel, and he lived with McCarrick for a bunch of years, kind of similar to Maciel, and didn't know about him either. Had no info.
I was shocked. Shocked.
Yeah, shocked. Who knew?
I'm shocked that my roommate was a monster.
I mean, this is one guy who had deep connections to two of the most grave monsters in recent history in the Catholic Church, but didn't know anything. And we're supposed to believe that.
Prevost is considered a Papa BLA. His name has come up recently, but I want to be honest with you. Kevin Farrell's not going to be Pope. Neither is Cardinal Fernandez. I've been paying attention to like more learned people on the. Neither of those men are likely to become Pope. In fact, Cardinal Fernandez is the litmus test for the next Pope. And that litmus test is how quickly do you fire him? You know, you have to be really nice about it. You go send him back to Argentina to go become the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires or something, but you get him out of Rome. You get him out of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. How quickly? Neither of those men are going to be Pope. I am skeptical that American is going to be Pope while the United States is a geopolitical power, especially not the Trump years, unless Cardinal McElroy wins the conclave, which, I mean, at that point, just
it's over. It's over. Put a fork in it. The Lord is coming back. It's going to be done. Here's the thing, though, and I've talked to Father Charles Murr about this before, and he tells me, listen, Joe, you're so naive, Joe. You always promote your enemies. Because I would always ask him, hey, if they know that Bugnini was a bad guy, why promote him? Why not fire him? That's not how you do business at the Vatican. They never have, apparently. So if you were Pope, I'd fire these guys. I'd laicize all these men. They'd be gone. They wouldn't be around anymore. But we still continually see, no matter who gets the chair, we just see them being promoted. Benedict XVI, he not only promoted, but also kept all kinds of men that were around that had bad reputations. Why? Why would we do that?
Keep your enemies closer, I guess, right? But the problem
laicize them, and then now are powerless.
I mean, the Vatican has a dungeon, doesn't it? I mean,
does it?
You start like aiding and abetting in predatory behavior against seminarians, which is what I would say somebody could make a case against Farrell. Probably warrants time in a dungeon somewhere. Even if it's a modernized dungeon with all modern amenities to make us so it's in keeping with the European Union standards on such things, fine, whatever, but keep them away from people. Because either they do the bad thing themselves and we haven't found out about it, or at the very least, they're big with the people who do the bad thing. And maybe we should take note of this.
Yeah.
But you're going to see either this will be dismissed outright. I mean, it could very well be dismissed outright. Or if you want to be really cynical here and just talk about this in terms of worldly power politics, you have Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is actively, according to all credible reports, actively campaigning to be Pope behind the scenes right now, getting votes as we speak. And his rivals for that post, for his faction's essentially nomination, are now charged with this stuff. Let's get real Game of Thrones or West Wing here. And he sits down with them privately and says, if a conclave happens soon, you will withdraw your support and you will support me.
Oof.
It's extremely cynical, isn't it? Power politics. And for those who think that's a really cynical way of looking at things, read up on how conclaves in the last half century have been rumored to go, and you will see why I'm very cynical about this.
Let me throw another log on with seconds on the clock here on the radio side of our conversation. There was another report out this week that the Vatican continues to stay in the red financially. Tens of millions of dollars in the hole every year, year after year. They are financially struggling. How much will that play in the conclave? Whoever gets elected has to do a financial reform of the Curia.
I think that combined with Catholic Charities and USAID scandal is going to play big. If a conclave happens in the next 3 years, Donald Trump's going to be there too. Not in person, but he's going to loom over it because the US and Germany are the biggest funders of the Vatican.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.